Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Flock Talk. We're happy to have you here tonight. It's Jeff and Gary and myself with our smiling little faces. We've got some good questions tonight, but I hope you folks bring some good questions to the show tonight as well. So we're going to have fun with it coming up in just a few seconds. All righty. Folks, I hope you all have had a good week. I know we have. We were just talking about that before we came on air. And the summertime is, I can't decide whether it's a slow time or a fast time for me. At the time, I think it's going to be a slow time. We get the grandsons, and that speeds it up tremendously. But why don't we get started? We've got a PowerPoint here with some questions preloaded onto it. Are there any differences between large fowl and bantams of the same breed and variety? And I'll tell you why I put that in there is because a couple of days or so ago, someone posted a picture of buff Brahmas, and it generated a little bit of a stir that was confusing people. In that one was a mature large fowl, and the other one was a bantam, and they said it was not a fair comparison because there was differences. And I got several private messages, folks wanting to know if there were indeed differences. There's only one really, uh, and that's the weight, and of course the physical size. But if you look, and I'll pick on reds again. If you look up Rhode Island red single fowl, large fowl, it gives you the breed description and the color description. If you thumb back over to the bantam section and look up Rhode Island red bantams, it will refer you to the breed description for the large fowl and the color description for the large fowl. So that's the only difference between bantams and large fowl. It is the size of the bird and the weight. Someone wanted to know if we had any suggestions for breeding to improve temperament. How difficult and how long might it take to see improvements? I don't really have a good, hard, and fast answer for that. It's it. You can do it. Absolutely, you can do it. I think some of it depends on how bad the temperaments are and how long they've been bad, as to how long it'll take you to breed that out. But temperaments is something that's highly heritable. So it's something once you have it, you kind of got to be tuned in to watching out for it all the time.
Yeah.
And just like getting rid of any other fault or something you don't want in your breed, you not only have to get rid of the birds that display it, but if you really want to eliminate it from the flock, is to eliminate the parents that produce that bird and all the siblings. That's a little painful, I know sometimes, because you can wind up getting rid of a lot of birds. I've been down that road myself. But it's the only way I know of to make a little bit faster improvement in your birds that have faults and those kind of problems. Jeff, Gary,
So,
you
so,
guys have any?
well, all right, and thanks, Rick. So is temperament? I don't personally feel that temperament is 100% genetic. I realize that temperament is genetic, and it is a trait that passes through. Um, and the only reason I say that is I've seen people split, like a hatch of birds or a group of birds. One person takes them home, coddles them, plays with them every day, right? Shows them a lot of, interaction and whatever. And the other person throws them in a coop, feeds and waters them every day, and that's it, right? And so that also environment, I mean, light intensity to good light environment. I've walked a lot of flocks in my life, and they vary greatly, even though they're exact same genetics based on their environment. And this is going to sound weird and somebody's going to hate me for it, but I can honestly tell you that the person managing the birds, the birds will pick up on, the manager, or feelings from the manager, the way that they're handled and managed. And, so a lot of times when I walk a flock more on the commercial side, right? If I walk in and the flock just flies to the other end of the building, they scatter, right? I know that there's an environmental problem. Okay.
Yeah.
So there's something wrong there. So I don't know, how, what percentage ties into that, or, how do you feel about that? What I just said, Rip?
I don't disagree with you, although I think there are some lines that are more prone to having bad temperaments. An example is Al Hansen had some really good looking Rhode Island red bantams, but all the males that had black spurs were mean as they could be. If
Well,
they
where'd the
hatched,
black spurs come from?
I don't know. That's the only time that I have seen red bantams hatch with black spurs. I see some in other folks' birds, but and I've talked to some of them privately, and they said, yeah, they can be pretty bad mannered birds. Those birds originally came out of Rochester, New York. Now, I don't know whether that was ingrained before Al got a hold of them, but he had them for 30 years or so. But every one with the black spur were bad business. The ones with the yellow spurs or normal colored spurs, they were fine.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have the experience you have, and I never will. But of the flocks that we had, here at my place, I've only ever had issues with one Americana hen, and I had a black Australorp rooster that was really aggressive and mean, right? So he didn't live long, so he died of lead poisoning soon after. But anyway,
That's kind of like what Laura said.
uh,
So I got a group of barred rocks from a friend of mine, and she told me, she said, "Look, these things, they're aggressive, but I know you like barred rocks." And I said, "Well, I like, they lay nice large eggs." And she had like 6 or 8 hens and another rooster that was with them. And she said, "I just can't keep them because she has a small child that like to go help her tend to her chickens." And I said, "Well, I'll take them." And I got them. And, the first time I went in the pen with them, they acted a little crazy. And I thought, okay, this is going to be crock pot number one. This is crock pot number two. But when I started feeding them my feed, it was a matter of days. Now I can go in and sit down and they'll crawl up in my lap. There's if it's real sunny out back or whatever, I'll actually go in this pen and sit on my bucket because it's shaded in there and it has fans. And these birds will come around my feet, get on my feet, they'll get on my legs and just sit there with me. So I think that yes, while sometimes it is genetic, like what Jeff said, it could be environment or whoever's taking care of them, or it could also be nutrition.
Kerry, I tend to agree with that because back in the day when Al was still alive, that was way before Jeff Maddox came around and anybody was even talking about the nutritional impact on birds like he does. It would be interesting to see if that would have made a difference. I will also tell you that typically when I hear people that have problems with Rhode Island Reds, for example, with their attitudes, that those are hatchery birds. And the people
Hmm.
that have standard bred birds, I can't think of any time that I've ever heard anybody say they were mean. I'm not saying it doesn't happen. I can't remember an instance of it. What's our next one here? How can I be sure my birds are eating adequate grit? Good question.
That's a really hard question because, I mean, the only true way to know is to euthanize the bird and open it up and look inside the gizzard. But it should be between 1 and 2% of the feed by weight. So, if it should be like 1 pound for every 50 pounds of feed is the normal, once they've hit their quota and they've got enough grit in their gizzard, right? The maintenance level is going to be roughly 1 pound for every 50 pounds of feed. That's as close as I can dial it in for you, right? That's not.
Jeff, I know you're a fan of adding grit to the feed that birds eat. Do you also make available to them grit if they want it in a little extra feeder or something like that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so my rule of thumb is add 1% to the feed by weight, which would be a half a pound per 50.
Mm-hmm.
And then, which isn't a whole lot because grit is heavy. Okay. So it's, half a pound per 50 pounds of feed. And then, you always have somewhere nearby, close proximity to either the feed or the water, you have a cup or a container that you keep free choice grit in. When we ran our field trials at Fertrell, we took a small plastic dish, like a yogurt dish or something like that, and we just simply, staple gunned it or screwed it to the, the wall. And as the birds got taller, we kept raising it up so it was level with the average bird's back, right? So, you could unscrew it or move it up. And yeah, they were, I mean, even as chicks, they can figure out how to free choice this.
I know that the starter feed that I get from Triple M's has the grit in it, but I don't know if they put it in the other feeds or not. I haven't really paid that close of attention to it, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I'd have to go back and look at the formulas that I've made for them. I thought we had 25 pounds of grit per ton, which would be that 1% mark.
Yeah.
In all the feeds. But I mean, that's what we're shooting for. But,
very good. What do we got next here? Let's see. What is the difference between iodized and non-iodized salt? And which is better for poultry? What's your thoughts, Jeff?
yeah, I mean, iodized, they add iodine to the salt when they're processing it. And that's all it is. And then non-iodized would be your really natural salts, like your sea salts, your Himalaya salt, your real salt, that's just non-iodized salt. Without looking at the tag and the ingredients, I just go with non-iodized. I just go with regular salt versus non-iodized. Versus iodized. Iodine is going to mess with the thyroid and the pituitary systems of any animal. And it's such a small amount that's needed that I don't really want to gamble with too much getting into the system and making them, it would be hyperthyroid versus hypo. And, either's wrong or either's bad. So, but here, all my recommendations are standard salt, which would be the non-iodized.
Interesting. Y'all
And
sell
like for easiest ways is Redmond. Redmond salt is really good plain salt.
That's what I use. That's what I use in the house. I mean, that's what I've used here for table salt for, I can't even tell you how many years. It's more than 10. It's probably getting close to 20.
That's what I use when I eat salt, which is not very often, but I use that Redmond. I like it.
I eat lots of it. I'm taking up your quota there, Rip.
Okay, good. I'm glad you're keeping up with the slack there.
My doctor tells me, yeah, you need to keep an eye on your salt intake. And the average human needs about 1 gram, 1,000 milligrams of salt on an average day. somewhere in that ballpark, give or take a couple hundred. I'm probably closer to 3,000 milligrams a day or 3 grams a day. And he checks my sodium levels or my sodium levels of my blood, and I always fall right in the mid range. So
Good
I'm
deal.
just going to keep doing what I'm doing.
There you go. If it
Yeah.
ain't broke, don't fix it.
It ain't broke.
Esther wants to know if there's a good layman's book on genetics. I've tried to read a couple of books and my eyes are crossing. Esther, I can feel your pain. The same thing happens to me. Um, I know I need to learn more about genetics, but every time I try, I get so frustrated because my mind just doesn't absorb that kind of information. I don't know of a good book for laymen. I'll be honest with you. Um, and there's really not many current genetic books out there that I'm aware of at any rate. But
Yeah, I haven't seen a lot of books that were current on poultry genetics, period.
yeah,
I don't know that exists, especially when in layman's terms, because genetics is it can get very confusing very quick.
There's nothing layman's term about doing genetics at all.
no.
Right. The only one that might actually come close would be, Kenny Triano kind of regurgitated a lot of, he's done a lot of research and reposted it in a little bit more of layman's terms, but it's still, it's still got too many 5-syllable words in it for me.
Yeah.
So
It's all very technical just by nature, which I understand. But I guess if I could figure out how to simplify that, I could make some money. But my eyes cross before I get too far into it.
me too. I'm going to stick to feed.
Papa's Place wants to know, hello, guys, just getting here. What are your thoughts on adding field rice to scratch feed?
There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with using rice in a scratch grain. Rice is going to have very similar to nutritional levels as if you were using wheat. Now, if it still has the hull on it, like if it's a wild rice or like that, then it's going to be more closer to feeding either oats or barley than it would be wheat. If it's been dehulled, just depends on which strain of rice it is, but there's nothing wrong with using rice. There's some rice byproducts out there that aren't good for chickens, but as long as you're as long as they're screenings or whole rice, it's a common feed ingredient and almost, all over Asia and where rice is grown. So it's not a problem.
I'm curious, and you may or may not know, I don't know, but is the fiber in rice similar to the fiber in oats?
It is. If you look at the rice grains that hold their hull, they have a lot of similarity to what oat looks like as well.
Yep.
Gotcha. The reason I ask is because we're starting to grow a good bit of rice here in Florida now, particularly down around Lake Okeechobee.
Yeah, it's stretching.
Next on our list here is, what are the pros and cons of adding hemp seed to my bird's diet?
Well, okay. So as a nutritionist, this puts me in a really tight spot because hemp has not been authorized by the American Association of Feed Controls officials, right? So we're not allowed to recommend feeding hemp. They're getting ready to vote on it in August. So hemp products like hemp seed meal might be legal, a month from now, but right now they're not. So, hemp helps the omega-3s. Hemp seed has, it's rich in those omega-3 oils. It's got a lot of fiber. So there's a lot of positives. The rest of the world is all feeding hemp, whether it's hemp seed meal, hemp seed, or all that. So the big thing is, so the protein in whole hemp seed is not that high. It's going to be about 18 to 20%, but it's not going to boost the protein, but it is going to boost the fat level, and it'll also boost the omega-3 content to the bird and to the meat and to the egg. So that would be the number one, pro. And I really can't tell you of a con. As long as it's good, clean hemp seed, and it hasn't gone wild on you and formed THC, then you're good to go. So.
Very good. Let's see. Papa's had a comment here. I've been adding about 5% to my scratch feed just to stretch the scratch feed. I'm assuming he's talking about rice since he's the one that asked that question. But he only gives a very little scratch feed per day as a treat.
Right. So if it's 5% of his scratch feed, he can go quite a bit higher. It can be up to a third of the scratch feed without any issues. And look, if he reaches out to me with the other ingredients of the scratch feed, I can help him work it out that it's nutritionally solid, without going over on anything. But I can safely say that the rice can be 25% of the scratch grain blend. It probably can go higher, just depending on what else is in there.
Gotcha. Angela Booth had a comment here about Kenny's genetics book. Said it's the best resource she has found. It's still not simple,
No,
but
it's
it is
not.
understandable.
Yeah, I mean, it brings it down a level, right? It doesn't bring it down to layman's terms, but it definitely brings it down a couple levels than sitting in a room listening to geneticists talk back and forth, right, in language that you really can't understand any of. So, Kenny has simplified it a good bit. He's brought it down a couple layers as far as understandability for the average person. But yeah, it's still pretty intense.
And like she says, he does have that Breeders Academy. And if you do subscribe to that, you can actually schedule a call, and he'll break it down into what I call redneckanese, where we can actually, he'll put it in terms where you can understand it.
Very good. Sue Dobson wants to know any recommendations for bringing more yellow out in Rhode Island Red's legs. Best thing I have found is green grass.
Yep.
Yeah. Green grass, free choice alfalfa.
Yeah.
If she can get some really good high quality alfalfa, she can start. It's going to sound weird, so just bear with me, Sue. Don't shoot the messenger. But you could use something like marigold petals if you want to grow some marigolds, marigold powder. You can also use paprika. The red and the paprika pepper will help with coloration. So those are the typical things that what we just mentioned are the typical things that will enhance the yellow in the body, beak, legs, skin, everything.
So I actually bought a push mower with a bagger for that reason. And I'll push my yard with the bagger just so I can go empty it out into my breeding pens, and they love it.
I bet they do.
Yeah.
Sue
As long as
you,
it's
Jeff.
fresh. Thanks, Sue. Carrie, as long as they're fresh. Here's the this is what I don't like is fresh cut grass, believe it or not, has a really short shelf life. Okay. So you've got about 4 hours from the time you cut it till they consume it, right? Then it starts heating and fermenting, and this is what it's supposed to do, just like farmers making hay. Right. Then you have to leave it until it cures out before it's, stabilized enough to feed it again, or you can cause digestive upset. So
Right.
every year, I hear folks go out and do what you're doing, but they're keeping clippings for a couple days, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you're causing some pretty serious digestive upset
Yeah,
after.
that's not good.
So
Yeah,
if
you
you want to
can't
go
do that.
clip some, yeah, if you want to go clip some, you put it in there fresh and make sure they clean it up, right? You do not want leftovers hanging around.
So what I do is about a handful. Like I take my bag and I'll put a good handful per bird in there because I don't want it to get rotten while it's in there with them.
Handful's a lot. So per bird, that's a lot. I
Yeah,
mean, depending on the size of the chicken, you know, like your breast project, you're probably okay. But a
yeah, that's a
handful's a
large.
lot. Okay.
On my
So,
game birds that I have, they just get a handful per pen, and
yeah.
there's 3 to
All right.
5 in
Doesn't really take a whole lot when it comes right down to it.
the
Now,
pen.
if you think about it, their diet really, the maximum amount of green forage or pasture that a chicken would intake kind of naturally is between 5 and 10% of their diet. Okay. And that's on a per weight basis.
Yeah.
So it's a very small amount. I don't think I've ever done, other than ostriches and emus, they take a lot of fiber and a lot of green, like alfalfa. And you can also do it in waterfowl, right? Ducks and geese, because they're natural grazers. They do much more grazing than a chicken does. But
I
when it
have
comes
heard.
to a chicken, yeah, we just need to be careful. Go ahead,
I,
Rip.
I was just going to say I have heard several people comment, and I've never raised this breed before, but they say Buckeyes will eat more grass than all their other breeds that they have.
And there are breeds out there that do that. And
Yeah.
I'll be the first one to tell you, I don't know all the breeds and what they do, but there are some that are much better grazers than others. Sue, I bring that back up for Sue.
Okay.
Yeah, the lycopene supposedly will help with coloration as well. I haven't verified that too, so I'm not going to say one way or the other, but I have heard that recently. Somebody asked the question actually in Poultry Breeder Nutrition Group, and I can't confirm it because my chickens didn't like tomatoes, right? That's just my chickens. So,
I haven't ever wanted to give up my tomatoes so my chickens could eat them. So I know that's just being stingy, but that's just me. Rachel wants to know: can you breed for mite parasite resistance to a certain extent? It seems some birds in my flock have more parasite issues, while others don't at all. I don't know. I'll be honest with you,
I
Rachel. I
don't
don't know.
either. Well, so Jennifer Bryant is experiencing something that there's a difference in the water in her two flock in where two bird locations. Like she's got a one barn out here that's on well water, and she's got another group of birds on city water, and her well water is high in sulfur, and she's not had a mite problem with those birds. So take that for what it's worth. Carrie knows more about it than I do. I'll be right back.
Yeah, she and I have actually had a couple of conversations about that, and she just asked me the question out of nowhere, and I said, "Well, we had talked about her well water, and so if you can get your birds sulfur, they can safely ingest it as long as you keep it under around 5 to 600 parts per million, or 5 to 6,000 parts per million, which is quite a bit. That will, once they build that up in their body, that'll get rid of the mites and keep them gone. But with Jennifer, she's got enough sulfur. We haven't tested it yet, but it is enough to where you can actually smell it. so it is pretty high in her well water. And she gives it to her quail, and her quail have no issues with any kind of parasites.
When I worked for the Game Commission up in Ocala, we had some artesian wells out along the Silver River, and the sulfur content in those wells was so high you didn't even want to stand around and smell it, much less try to drink it. I don't have any
Right.
idea what it was. Had to be horrendous. So, uh, oh, here from Elizabeth wants to know if we have a roadmap for breeding world class temperament into a line prone to bird on bird aggression. Don't have a roadmap, Elizabeth. You're just going to have to eliminate those birds. I think to eliminate those birds that are showing that problem and the birds that produced them. And it's going to be pretty extreme because you may only get a handful that aren't showing that temperamental issue. But
I mean, that can be an issue with game birds and with quail, even. And for quail, I found that overpopulation.
yeah,
You know, you have in some of my breeding pens for my quail. You know, it's about a foot wide, 10 inches tall, and a foot and a half deep. And when I have 5 birds in there, I have no problems with aggression. But if I put 2 or 3 in a spot that small, you know, it in some of I used to have a line of birds that was aggressive, and if I had 2 or 3 in that small spot, they would be aggressive towards each other. But if I throw 2 or 3 more in there to where they were really overpopulated, then I had no issues with aggression, and I was able to have really good fertility out of them as well for the on the breeding side.
I raised bob white quail, well, and ringneck pheasants too,
Yeah,
and they could be very, very aggressive towards each other, both of them.
bob whites especially. Yeah.
Yeah.
You don't think that was a crowding issue, though, Rip? I mean, I'm going back to what Carrie started out with is, I would experiment with different size living space. Now, for sure, if you're trying to keep multiple cockerels in together, especially when they hit puberty and there's hens or pullets in sight,
Yeah, I can bring it on.
that's just the nature of the beast. And I've
Yeah.
seen Rhode Island Reds do that. I've seen lots of breeds that are considered docile, but they hit that 16-week point period where they want to start breeding, right?
All
Or
bets
they're
are off.
feeling that urge, right? I don't care what breed you got. It could be a bloodbath. I mean it. Um,
Well,
Absolutely.
I know on the quail standpoint, even in a situation where you've got 15 hens and 3 to 4 males in the same pen, if you have them in a pretty tight quarters, you know they won't typically be that aggressive towards each other. Where if they were spread out with more room, they would be aggressive. And I've had similar situations with some of the game birds that I've had as well. You know, if I just have a trio in a fly pen, they can tend to get a little aggressive. But if I put 4 or 5 more in there with them, it's less of an issue.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Let's see.
so I'm wondering now. So
Yeah.
quail are covey birds, and they
Hmm.
want to be close together.
Yes.
Okay,
Right.
that's their instinct. You chickens are not necessarily. They'll be in flocks. I get it, but they're not really close to each other. Like you kick up a covey of quail out hunting, and 8 or 10 or 20 of them is going to go up all at one time, and they're in a condensed area, right? But if I go pheasant hunting, I'm only going to kick up if there's a hen with a rooster. I might kick up 1 or 2, but I'm not going to kick up, more than that. Um, they're more individual and more territorial than perhaps a quail. So I think we're seeing instinctual, you know, uh, you know, living patterns based on the species of bird.
Just a little aside funny story. about coveys of bobwhite quail. Back when I worked for the Game and Fish Commission, we were out working about 1 o'clock in the morning, and I'm walking out across this clear cut, stepped right in the middle of a covey of quail. And when they took off, it scared the stew out of me. Oh, man, frightened me, to say the least.
How many was in that covey, Rick?
I didn't count them all. I was just ducking and dodging, trying to figure out what it was. Let's see.
I like Sue's comment. You know, you never put three males together. Two would gang up on one and kill the third. I've seen that, so that is very true.
That will definitely happen.
And it doesn't matter if you've got 25 hens. In the chicken world, I've seen that happen. The two in together, you'll be fine. But that third one, eventually that third one's going to go to sleep.
Rachel says,
sorry, I brought up.
I'm sorry. That's all right.
That's all right. All right. Too many drivers.
I have recently started using wettable sulfur in their dust bath, and that seems to be helping some.
Yeah.
That will definitely be a big help.
So how often are you guys cleaning your pens? Now this is on the ground, right?
Yeah.
This isn't wire, of course, but
I just started to say it kind of depended on the type of pens I was using. Down here in Florida, we can put ours right outside, right on the dirt, so that wasn't much of a cleanup issue. But if I had them in enclosed pens inside, then yeah, it could build up to where it needed cleaning on a fairly regular basis. I think the big thing and the big reason cleaning pens for me was you want to keep the cotton picking coccidiosis down, and it is so bad down here in the South. It's not even funny.
Kelly's are they're individually housed unless he's mating. And I think the average pen is roughly 4 foot by 4 foot. So, I've seen pictures of his pen setup. And it's an aggressive breed. So he's going to keep them separated, except for during mating. You just don't need the issues that of putting them together. So, so let's say a 4 foot by 4 foot and you got a single one or two birds in there. How often, what are you thinking? Once a week?
Once a week, once every 2 weeks, maybe.
Okay. I think you just have to eyeball it, and see how muddy and mucked up it's looking. And,
basically if it looks dirty, it probably is need cleaning.
Yeah.
Let's see.
What else you got in the lineup?
That's all we have from the viewers so far. Let's get back to our I'm starting to get soft-shelled eggs from my hens. What can cause this and how can I prevent it? What's your thoughts, guys?
All right. So there's three things, right? And the first thing that I always ask is age, right? So if we're talking about a hen second or third lay cycle and she hasn't been put through some type of a managed molt, right, where she's gotten body fat off, she's had a full 60, 90 days break in egg production or even a little longer, and offered enough of the right kind of calcium to rebuild the bone mass. I posted that article about eggs, and it led me to another article that said 60% of the calcium used for making an egg comes out of the bloodstream. It's absorbed out of the intestinal tract. The other 40% is coming out of the bone, and that has to be replaced. Well, as the hen reaches towards the end of her lay cycle, especially if it's more of a prolific laying breed, 200 plus eggs, those eggshells are just going to they're going to start to thin out anyway. So one, I'd go with age. Okay. Two, I would go with, is there enough of the right kind of calcium in the diet, right? I mean, everybody just looks at the calcium level. But 3, and this is sneaking up on me, and we've already talked about it, but hard water. So the harder the water, the more hardness that the water has reduces the ability for a bird to assimilate or digest nutrients, right? To get those minerals into the bloodstream. So I'm starting to see a lot more, hard water issues out there. So yeah,
That's
I mean
interesting.
it's really becoming a problem, more than I ever knew before, right? So I learn something new every day, but for the last 4 or 5 years, I've been watching, and hard water is really creating an issue, for calcium absorption. So those would be the 3 things I look at. I don't know about you guys, but that's.
Do you think there's any connection to heat stress that could cause that? I've been asked that
Okay.
before.
Not so nutritionally. Okay, so it all ties together. Gets hot, the hens eat less, right? And she's not actually getting enough grams of calcium eaten every day to make that eggshell, right? So, up north here, if I let a hen do it, she'll eat 6 ounces of feed, right, in the wintertime. Now, in the summertime, she's only going to eat 3. Now, we're talking about double the intake, right, in the winter versus the summer. And if you're not changing your protein level, your calcium levels, your vitamin levels, right, if you're not adjusting, and we've done shows on, adjusting for heat and temperature and all that, but it's if you're not moving that adjustment scale around based on the amount of feed being eaten, and too many people want to just free choice feed, let them have whatever they want, so they don't even know how much feed is being eaten. But if we're not making that adjustment, and people say, well, I free choice oyster shell. Look, of the multiple flocks that I've had in the backyard, and again, mine were just hatchery birds, backyard layers, but they were my observation group. They were still chickens. 2/3 or 1/3 of them were not smart enough to find the free choice oyster shell. Okay. If it was not where the feed was, they didn't get it eaten. So, I would just simply throw 1 or 2 handfuls of oyster shell in the feeder, once a week. And when I'd go to feed, if there's no oyster shell left in the feeder, I throw a couple more handfuls of oyster shell in the feeder, right? Just let them pick around and get the feed out around from the oyster shell. That's what worked for me. Okay. People need to do what they got to do, but that's what worked for me.
Back in the day when we had those commercial leghorns here, that's what we did was once a week. Of course, they were on trough feeders, but we would go top dress lightly on top of the feed with oyster
Yeah,
shell.
that works.
Yep.
If people are willing to do it, but it needs to be where the feed is,
Yes.
so the birds
Yes.
can find it. I still want a free choice, just like the grit. Okay, so my system was I mixed grit and oyster shell together, and I provided that in a free choice feeder. But I also put those in the feeder for the birds that couldn't seem to figure out what free choice was, right? So,
And sadly,
you
there's
know,
some out there.
well, it's their own societal thing, but it's,
Yep.
yeah.
Monkey brains.
Got a comment here from Cece. Um, I just learned that blackhead disease can absolutely unalive chickens. I thought it was only turkeys. Cece, I have never had a case of blackheads in either turkeys or chickens here, so I'm no use to you there. I can't speak to that.
Yeah, I mean, the protozoa, or yeah, for blackhead is all over the place, right? I mean, wild birds carry it, wild turkeys carry it because they're immune to it. um, Laying hens, chickens can carry it. The only time that chickens, they can have it, and you know and they can show some symptoms, but generally they do not die from it. It's rare for the common chicken to die from blackhead. Now, in a high stress, usually like in a muddy season where there's a lot of rain and they're eating a lot of earthworms, that's when I see blackhead being much more of an issue because earthworms are a carrier of blackhead, right? So it just, but the birds would have to be pretty stressed to start dying or showing severe symptoms of blackhead. Most chicken breeds are able to fight it off and just be a carrier, right? And
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay, that gets us caught up on viewer questions. Is there a more natural wormer I can use for my birds? And Jeff, I know, 2 or 3 years ago we did one, and you talked about your worming recipe. Um, I think that's probably more along the lines of what he's talking about.
Yeah, it's simple and it's cheap, but it's, somebody actually has to make it. So it's really just a mixture of cayenne, garlic, diatomaceous earth. I put a pinch of copper sulfate in there just for good measure and mix that in something like yogurt or mix it with some milk and top dress it to the feed. And I'll run that for a week, roughly, 5 to 7 days, and that get things back in normal. So, but you got to go to the store, you got to find the ingredients, you got to take the time to do it. It's not as easy as just ordering ivermectin and
Right.
giving it to your chickens, but it works fine, right? I am not a fan of worming chickens. I understand that it has to happen on occasion, depending on where they live, but a good diet that includes grit, whole oats, because oat hulls are a natural dewormer by themselves. Keeping some alfalfa meal in there, keep them moving, keep their pen clean. You really should never have to worm a chicken. I hate to say that out loud, but
Don't throw their feet on the ground.
get them, Gary. Get them. Get them.
I mean that's my biggest thing. Like
I know.
people ask me like, well, how do you feed them? We just throw it on the ground. Well, I mean, think about that for a minute. They make feeders for a reason.
That's right.
Yeah. I mean, if they went and ate their food off the ground, they'd have parasites too. So it's just the nature of the thing. But and the argument is, well, chickens eat off the ground, and people just see them scratch and peck at something on the ground, but they don't actually flip their bucket over and watch what they're doing, right?
Yeah.
So they scratch most of the time. When you see them digging or scratching, they're looking for an insect to move, right? That's what they're after.
Bug.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I agree.
Or they're looking for the right size stone because their owner didn't give them grit, or but they're not eating, processed feed, not eating grains. They're looking for bugs, they're looking for grass, and they're looking for stones. That's why chickens out there scratching around. But
Okay, what do we got next here? Let's see. It's been recommended to add oil to increase the fat of the feed mill feed, due to milk not wanting to increase wheat I think that's supposed to be due to mill not wanting to increase wheat and decrease oats and barley. It's been a fight, but I have no choice at this time to use them. What is your favorite oil to use to increase fat? Coconut, tallow, or olive oil? And if you
see,
don't
nobody
know,
gives
tallow
me,
is beef
yeah,
fat.
yeah, nobody ever gives me the opportunity to have tallow, but I can tell you hands down, the chicken wants tallow,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's from pork
Yep.
or whether it's from beef or whether it's from deer. If you put all those oils out and you let a chicken choose, I guarantee it's going for the tallow every time and first, right? And that is the best one for That's the best one for chickens and pigs. If you got a good, clean source of tallow, you know, then that's tallow or lard. That's what I would be using.
Yep.
Okay. Behind that, I'd be using coconut, then olive, then, maybe wheat germ, or it doesn't really matter once you kind of get past olive oil, in my opinion. In my opinion, doesn't, but
I tell you, if beef fat and lard is good enough for making biscuits, it's good enough for a chicken.
That's right.
you betcha. You betcha.
And I'm assuming that this is inside joke or something here, but says Laura says Kerry asked Jeff if he wants to discuss grit with one of my South Dakota poultry groups.
Oh, man. I joined for about 3 days, right? I joined, and these people are, you start talking about grit because they can't go buy it at the local Tractor Supply, and they think you're crazy. Oh, that's why they make pellets. So they grind it really fine, and they make pellets so the birds don't need grit. And
Them pellets are hard as a rock.
I ain't got time for this. I got out of that group just about as quick as I got into it. So, all right.
Sue says you can get tallow and lard at Wally World.
I wonder if it's any good though, Sue. I mean, I don't know where. I mean, I'm fussy about my food. Sorry, but yeah, you can. You can get them at Wally World. I didn't know you could get tallow. I was sure that you could get lard there.
Yeah, you can get lard, and I
Yeah.
when I buy lard, I usually get the Armor brand. That's pretty good. And I don't know if they have that up in y'all's neck of the woods or not, but
I don't
Mine's a
know.
good
I
butcher.
don't look. I buy all my meat and meat products directly from a farmer. All right. I do not buy it from a store. So I'm a fortunate individual. I
you
can
are.
get grit. I can get grit down the road, right? I have access to my chicken, pork, beef. I even have a private supply of salmon, right? So I don't have to buy meat at the store. So
Let's see. Up next on our PowerPoint is in turkeys. What does the term double rainbow refer to? And it's easier to show you than it is to tell you. And this bronze gobbler, you can see that the ends of the tail feathers have a white line on them. And if you go down a little further, you see another line of covert feathers that has a white line on it. That's the double rainbow. But in so many breeds of turkeys, it's missing, and it should be there. I know um, Royal Palms are probably some of the worst about not having that double rainbow, and they don't have a white, but they have black edging. You very, very, very seldom see one with the required amount of black in their tail. I'm interested in determining how much the deep litter method in coops with roosting bars of 2x4 sideways, not over 24 inches off the coop run floor, might play in reducing or preventing bumblefoot. That's something I've not had much problems with here. I don't know about you guys.
Well, I'll say this for me, I have not in the last couple of years had a case of bumblefoot in any of my breeding pens. And they start with, so when I put together them now, or as I went through refreshing them, I'll put a bag of stall pellets down. I will put about an inch of pine shavings, and then I'll cover that with 2 to 3 inches of peat moss, because the peat moss is ultimately what I want. And with that, I have not had any issues with bumblefoot in well over 2 years.
and you won't. So I mean, nobody wants to face this, but the truth about bumblefoot is it's caused by an external injury.
Yep.
Right. So the bird has either stepped on a piece of wire, a thorn, a splinter in a wood chip. I see a lot of people using, really big wood chips. And so when you
Yeah.
have a rainy season or you have a high moisture season, the sole of the foot, just like your foot, you go out and play in the water, right? It's going to soften. The tissue softens, right? That's what
Yep.
it's supposed to do. But then, if you put it on something that can pierce it or cause an injury, then the bacteria comes in from an injury. Okay, Bumblefoot doesn't start inside the chicken. I don't care what
Yeah.
anybody says.
No, it doesn't.
That's right. So there was an injury, right? And whether it was caused by the bedding or the environment, right, or the foot was soft, like in a high ammonia pen where somebody who doesn't clean out well, the ammonia or the bedding will deteriorate that foot pad,
Mm-hmm.
and that'll wear away, and then the bacteria gets in and causes bumblefoot. So, I mean, the answer to this is yes. I mean, deep bedding is, but the type of bedding or the type of litter is going to matter, right? So, somebody using like really coarse wood chips from like a municipal chipper, that goes through like a tree when they're cutting out the power lines
Oh,
along the road.
that stuff is bad.
Not good bedding, right?
No.
I mean, if you want to use that as a base way down, fine. But like Carrie's doing, you want whatever the top layer is to be pretty soft, pretty comfortable. Here this is going to sound way too simple, but you know what? Step in your chicken coop with your bare feet. If it's comfortable at the bottom of your foot, you're doing the right thing. If it's
Yep.
not, you're not. Okay, just
Same head for their feed.
I have wondered, and I've pretty well convinced myself that a contributing factor can sometimes be the height of the roost from the floor. Um,
it
I,
is. It
I
is. I
very,
mean,
very, very seldom have an incidence of bumblefoot, but I've got low roost. A
yeah,
friend of mine's got his roost at about 6 foot high. Well, he fights bumblefoot on a regular basis,
yes, he will.
but he doesn't
And I
want
don't
to
know what
hear
he's
it.
using for bedding either, but yeah.
Oh, Sue's back to the rescue here on
Fatworks
tallow
is the
and
brand.
Fatworks is the
Yeah,
brand.
Yeah.
yeah. Sue will not be happy with me, but honestly, I don't go to Wally World but once every 2 years, and that's only because I'm on a road trip and I can't. They're the only place open after 9 o'clock. So,
I can understand that.
yeah,
Too many Looney Tunes in our Wally World here in Lakeland.
yeah. I like to go at like 5 or 6 o'clock in the morning when there are no Looney Tunes. All the Looney Tunes are sleeping, and there's no competition for a checkout at 5 or 6 o'clock in the morning.
True.
Yeah.
Does anyone feed garlic instead of putting it in the bird's water? What form do you use, powder or flakes? How much and how often would be much appreciated advice.
Yeah, I mean, garlic is coming to be really important or really beneficial in all animal feeds, including birds. It's going to actually that the sulfides or the sulfur component of garlic builds up in the bloodstream, but so does the smell or the taste. So it works really good as a mite deterrent. If you want to feed it, but you're feeding it like 3 pounds per ton of feed. It's not a lot, and it
No.
takes a while to build up in the system. You're also going to get some immune system support, and it's going in as a powder, not a flake. Um, you can run it all the time if you want. Right?
Hmm.
There's no side effects to using it all the time.
Going back to the question on roost, Fat Country wants to know how high should the roost be?
My
Mine's
roosts
about
were level and 3 foot off the ground.
mine are about
That's
2 feet.
yeah. I would say it depends on the breed, right? I was running 4 to 5 pound chickens. If I was having 8 pound chicken, mature chicken, I would be like rip 18 to 24 inches off the ground.
Yeah,
You,
these red males, they can get pretty sizable, and I try to keep
yeah,
roost low for that reason.
right. Now, your roost height needs to vary based on your breed size
Yes.
and how far up can they comfortably, without killing themselves and beating themselves up, how far can they get up, fly off the ground, right? So,
Yep.
yeah, for your Rhode Island Reds, I would definitely be, you're right on. I think at 2 foot, 18 inches to 2 foot, I wouldn't go any higher.
Let's see. Esther wants to know, how long is your garlic tincture good for?
Forever.
Yeah,
Yeah,
no expiration
yeah.
date that I can see why
It
you would
really
need one.
doesn't. If you keep it properly, once it's finished, I just keep it in a cabinet somewhere so it's not going to get hot. The temperature, it can be room temperature. You don't want it to get hot. I don't like to get it exposed to sunlight or too much light.
Yeah.
So I just keep it in a cabinet, and you know, it's good for as long as you need it.
Mm.
Okay, next up is help. My son washed chickens before I got in the barn and he used too
Ooh.
much bluing. He stained our white leghorns. Is there
Ooh.
anything we can do to get it out?
Yes,
Wait for him to molt.
that's exactly right.
I
Control the mold.
I have seen that happen many times, and many things have been tried to remove the bluing, but once it's in there, it's in there. And you have to just be patient and wait for them to molt it out.
Yeah,
Too
I
much
can
bluing,
confirm that. Yeah, you even doing laundry. I like to
yeah,
use a few drops of bluing when I do my whites.
yep,
Yeah, if you don't add it to your laundry right, you're gonna get some blue spots that never come out.
Yep.
Never come out. I don't know what's in that stuff, but it
it's potent.
never comes out. Yeah, it is.
We are running out of time here before we ran out of questions, so I'm going to hold ours for our next uh, time we do a flock talk. But I really appreciate everybody's input, both before we did our show and during our show. You folks make our show very worthwhile and add to it a lot. We certainly appreciate you doing that. Jeff, Carrie, do you gentlemen have anything you want to add to what we've done here today?
Well, it was a great show. I had a good time.
I did too. I
Yep.
did too. So, hey, until 2 weeks from today, tonight, really, not today, in 2 weeks, we'll be back with another PK360 live stream. Thank you for joining us, and we will see you guys in 2 weeks.